Welcome to Commission Ed, the Air Force Officer Podcast. Here we explore the training and development of America's leaders in the application of air power and the profession of arms. The views expressed are those of the hosts and do not reflect the official policy or position of the United States Air Force, Department of Defense, or the U.S. government.
Welcome back to another episode of Commission Ed, the Air Force Officer Podcast. I'm Colin Slade.
And I'm Reed Gann, and we're your hosts for Commission Ed.
All right, we are excited to bring you another interview. This one will be from Captain CJ Carlisle. He is a friend of mine that I've met through Air Force ROTC. We have spent multiple summers together doing field training and have stayed in contact through the intervening semesters. He is definitely one of the best people I have met in my time in the Air Force. And so I'm excited to share with all of you his perspective on being an officer, as well as his experience before he ever became one.
Yeah, and you know what, Colin? I unfortunately have not had the pleasure of meeting CJ, and just listening to this recording, I feel like I'm missing out. So hopefully our audience can get a taste of what it must be like to be in the presence of this incredible airman. He just seems like a super cool dude, a guy I'd love to hang out, catch a meal with, and just sit down and shoot the bull with. He seems like a really great guy.
He absolutely is. And so in order to help you all fully experience his interview, we're actually going to break it up into two parts. The first part is going to be about his prior enlisted experience as a security forces airman. And then Reed and I will offer some commentary on that.
Yeah, and the next week, we're going to hear more about his commissioned experience as he joins in the space career fields, the 13 Sierra, as he talks about, what is coming with the new Space Force, and also his thoughts on officership in general, leadership, and how he's trying to develop himself. There's just so much good material here. As we talked about it, we didn't want to cut anything out, and we just want to get as much exposure to him and his thoughts and ideas as we could.
Absolutely. So hope you all will pull out a notebook. You'll want to take some notes on this. CJ offers some really great perspective, both on the enlisted and the officer side over the next 2 weeks, and hope that you will learn something that you can apply both in the immediate, but also across your career as an airman in the Air Force. So with that, we'll turn it over to Captain CJ Carlisle. Welcome back to another episode of Commission Ed, the Air Force Officer Podcast. I am Colin Slade, and today I'm being joined by
Captain Christopher Carlisle.
Welcome, Captain Christopher Carlisle. Do you mind if I call you CJ instead?
No, please do, and make it less formal.
That's right. Well, we're excited to have you here, especially to be representative of many years of service in the United States Air Force, both on the enlisted and now the officer side. Plus, I know you've got some pretty unique experiences from the things that you've done for the Air Force. So I'm going to turn the time over to you, CJ, let you talk about who you are, where you come from, what your upbringing looked like, why you joined the Air Force, that kind of stuff, and then we'll conversate this way through the whole thing.
Okay, sounds good. Well, thanks, brother. I appreciate being on podcast. It's kind of surreal in a ways. I'm super proud of what you're doing with this and the direction you're trying to go to really help people and young officers in general really try and get more depth of experience just from listening to a podcast. I think that's great. So I guess I'll start just introducing myself, where I'm from, when I enlisted. So initially I moved to Tennessee. I grew up in Tennessee at the time of 8 years old. My dad retired from the Navy and picked us all up, and we moved from Japan to Tennessee. I was a very young age. There, I picked up this great accent that I can never get rid of. It seems to stick with me.
Dude, I love your accent. It's so CJ to me. I love it.
Yeah, I appreciate it. I've grown to love it too. Never wanted to get rid of it. I love Tennessee. I love being from Tennessee. It helped mold me. At a very young age, being a young kid, being a biracial kid, Filipino and white, Tennessee, especially in this small town of Saudi Daisy, was not, the prime location for a young Filipino kid to move who had zero accent at the time. And all I really knew was military life, which was so diverse. I never even knew or could even envision, or I never saw racism as a kid growing up on a Navy base. I just thought we were all just people, and and I still think that obviously to this day. But going there and having to experience that firsthand was one of the major components in molding me into who I am today, as far as a leader and trying to make sure I'm fair with everyone, right? Because I had to deal with a lot of being bullied and stuff when I first got there, and then as I grew older and got good at athletics and things like that, everything just kind of worked itself out. In high school, I wasn't the best kid. So, you fast forward a little bit. Like I said, I dealt with a lot of racism growing up in elementary school. So it made me a little bit of an angry kid. I was a little bit of a troublemaker. Got to high school, got my driver's license, ran the streets pretty consistently, and got into a lot of things that I probably shouldn't have. I did get in trouble with the law a couple times, but nothing major, right? Obviously, I'm still here. I joined the Air Force. It was all when I was a minor. And I graduated high school hoping to play college ball. It didn't really work out. Turns out you got to go to class. So I was very undisciplined, right? It didn't work out for me. And I went home. I told my dad I was dropping out of college because I was an okay player. I won't say I was like awesome. I wasn't trying to go D1 or anything. I was just trying to play at state school. I think they were Division II at the time. And I had to do some remedial classes and stuff like that because I never took school seriously. Came home, told my dad, said, hey, I'm dropping out of college. My dad's like, well, you think that's the best idea? I said, yeah, school's not for me. I'm just done with it. I'm blah, blah, blah. And a lot of my friends were already college dropouts or not going to college. And I was like, okay, well, I'm just going to work. And he goes, well, where are you going to live? And I said, here. He's like, no, I don't think so. If you think you're going to be an adult, you're going to start adulting. Like, you need to start thinking about joining the military or doing something better with your life. Because if you keep on this path, he's like, you're going to wind up in jail. And I said, all right. I had already, at this time, I had an older brother who had already been in the Air Force for roughly 5 years. Who was a staff sergeant. And I did visit him over a couple summers. So one summer was to get away from the trouble that was happening around me at the time. And that was my first experience with the Air Force culture. And I fell in love with it right away. I was 15 years old. I said, man, this is awesome. Everybody goes to work and they party like it's college. There's like this dorm life. I fell in love. I was like, oh man, this is cool. So I called my brother up. I'm like, hey, Dad's going to kick me out of the house. Like, what should I do? I was like, I'm thinking I'm going to join the Marine Corps. It's going to be awesome. Me and my buddy David, we're going to go in the buddy system. And he's like, yeah, no, don't do that. I was like, okay. He goes, you've been here 2 summers. What do you think? And I said, I love it. I think it's awesome. He said, that is not the Marine Corps. He's like, it's not like that. He's like, join the Air Force, do that. And I said, okay. And I told Dad, because my dad was the same way. He's like, oh, you don't want to do the Marines. He's like, it's going to be too rough on you. And I was like, whatever, Although I do think the Marine Corps probably would have been good for me. I do have a couple friends and brother-in-laws and family that have been in the Marine Corps, but I'm glad that they talked me out of it and I joined the Air Force. So I ended up joining the Air Force, swearing into the delayed enlistment program, summer of 2001. I'm in, September 11th happens. And I remember sitting at my buddy's place and he's like, man, what are you going to do? Because when you're in the delayed enlistment program, you can kind of bail if you want. And, when that happened, everybody knew we were going to war. And I had already gotten pegged for security forces because I picked open general jobs of 5. And my brother was like, oh, yeah, you're getting security forces. That's it. And I was like, oh, shoot. And then my brother, I was a little depressed because, like I said, I was an angry, troubled kid. And I did have issues with law enforcement growing up. So I was like, yeah, I hate the police. I hate the police. The police are dumb. And I'm just a typical immature kid, not even knowing anything about anything, right? I was just ignorant to so much. And my brother tried to jazz it up for me. He's like, yeah, they wear cool hats, so that's cool. And I was like, all right.
Get a beret, sweet.
Yeah, and he's like, that looks cool in blues, and you can do some cool stuff. And I was like, all right. But security forces did start to appeal to me because growing up in Tennessee, I did like to shoot. I like to shoot guns all the time. And just something I like to do with my cousins up on the mountain, running around shooting bottles or whatever we could find. So my friends was like, do you think you're still going to go? And I was like, well, why wouldn't I? This is somebody just attacked us. Like, if I ever was more motivated to join, now's the time. And even then, as a young kid, I was like, yeah, I got to do what I do. I'm going to be a man of my word. I'm going to stand by my word. But I still didn't know what I was getting into. I shipped out October 15th, 2001, went to tech school. I did really well in basic training. My parents thought I was never going to make it out. They honestly was like, don't quit. They thought I was going to get kicked out for fighting or something, because I was always like, all I did, like, in my teenage years, I've gotten a lot of scraps, a lot of fights in the neighborhood and just out and about. So my dad thought for sure, like, you're going to get the basic training and somebody's going to say something to you and you're going to punch them. Not a NCO, but he was thinking like a peer, like another trainee, which didn't happen. I ended up becoming the dorm chief, which was wild. And we did good. We were really good flight. And that was like my first taste of leadership. And I really liked it.
If you don't mind, CJ, for those that don't know what a dorm chief is, can you explain that real quick?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. So a dorm chief in basic training is basically like a flight commander that you would be at field training or something like that, and you're in charge of the entire flight. But the difference between basic training and, field training or whatever, you can get fired, but if you do good, you're pretty much the dorm chief for the duration of basic training. So I was the dorm chief for 5 weeks because we had one, and then he got fired after the first week, and then I took over and I didn't get fired. So it was good.
What are kind of like the daily responsibilities of a dorm chief? How was this your first taste of leadership? What were you involved in?
So as a dorm chief, right, responsible for making sure that my flight's on time, right, that we're falling out on time, because you get times and a schedule from your TI, and he's like, hey, I need you guys to be ready at this time. Details need to be executed every morning and every night. So as the dorm chief, I have 5 element leaders that work under me. And those element leaders I put in charge of other detail commanders. So you would have like chow runners or latrine queen or other little details of things that needed to get done, right? Because then you talk about that's where we're starting to work as a team and managing those things. So as the dorm chief, I oversaw that, would delegate those tasks to whatever element leader who was overseeing whatever detail. And I will make sure that those tasks will get executed. Once we were in our 3rd week, our drill instructors would tell us where to be, and I was responsible for getting them there. So in basic training, once the marching starts to click, the drill, my responsibility was to follow them out and march them to where we ever had to go. If it was on the other side of the base, we would take the troop walk, and I would march them all the way to the medical center, have them fall out, be in position, and then I would have to be there on time because when I get there, my drill instructor's already there, and then I report to him, like, sir, trainee Carlisle reports 55 out of 55 present. We're good to go. And he'd be like, roger that, dorm chief, go get inside or whatever. Now that I'm older, I realize the frustration of my high school football coaches on why they would get so mad at me, because I was always a guy who could come into a room and speak to what was going on and try and motivate people to do what we needed to do. But instead of doing that, I was the guy who was like, nah, we're not going to do this, man. Who's with me? We're going to protest the summer workouts, and we're going to go have fun, and we're going to go do this. My coaches, they hated it, and rightfully so. I wish I could go back. Everybody thinks about how they can dial back in the hands of time and do things a little different. And that's one thing that I really wish I could have done, is take more of that challenge to be in that leadership role, because I don't know, maybe I could have made that little bit of difference. It would have took us all the way through the playoffs to the state championship. Maybe I could have motivated my team to work out harder. But we had some great leaders on my team that were still really close friends to me. And I was always trying to shy away from that role. And the Air Force put me in it, and I had no choice. It was like, you are going to succeed, and we are going to make you succeed. And I fell in love with it. I was like, oh, this is cool. It was cool for a while, and then you get in trouble for everything that's happening in basic training. I did more push-ups in basic training than probably anybody on my flight. Now, and I don't know how regulated my push-ups were at the time, but 2-minute push-ups, and I did 118, and I held the record for push-ups in my squadron because I did push-ups every day. Then when I got to tech school, I was like, man, I'm so tired of getting in trouble for everybody. Like, I need to take a break, because I had 5 people on my flight, and they were like, hey, Carlisle, dorm chief, like, you need to be the red rope. You need to be the one in charge of our team, because you know how to do it. You know how to do this. You understand, like, where we're coming from, and you're not scared to say something to a drill instructor if something ain't right, or a cadre who was teaching security forces at the time. And I was like, dude, I really don't have time for that. And I said, I don't want to. I said, honestly, I just want to get through tech school and get to my first duty station. I don't want this responsibility. So right there, I just kind of shied away. Midway through tech school, I started taking up a little bit more leadership roles, and it was cool. So after that, I got to my first duty station at Malmstrom Air Force Base. I thought it was going to be England when they was like, oh, Malmstrom. I was like, oh, that sounds English. And I was super stoked. I did well in security forces, into tech school, and got PRP, which at the time, I don't know, like a lot of people were getting out of PRP, and I had zero clue why.
Can you explain PRP?
Oh, it's the Personnel Reliability Program. I always do that. Acronyms. I briefed the Secretary of the Air Force, Heather Wilson, and my squadron commander was like, you blew it. You totally just used way too many acronyms for her. And I was like, oh, I'm so sorry. I felt bad. And here I was thinking I knew what I was talking about. Anyways, so I get to Malmstrom Air Force Base there, get put on flight, and that's where I start meeting a bunch of people, getting my first taste of the operational side of Air Force, a little bit of hazing on security forces and things like that, having some fun.
They make you go look for some flight line and all that?
Yeah, so like I get put on my first flight, and I'm with the 490th Missile Squadron, and back then we weren't under a security forces group yet, so we fell under with the missileers, so we were separated by each squadron. And they're like, okay, you need to report here for guard mount at this day, blah, blah, blah. So I'm like, okay, cool. I report for my first day at guard mount, and I remember I'll never forget these guys because I hated them for at least 6 weeks. His name was Carroll, and the other guy's name was Millet. And the guy Millet looked like the lead singer from Sum 41. I show up, and they're like, oh, you the new guy? And I'm like, yeah. And they're like, all right, well, you got your gun and stuff? I'm like, yes, sir. And these are senior airmen too, by the way. Like, I'm a one-stripe airman, and I'm completely crapping my pants with these senior airmen. They're like, well, go get the vehicles. And I'm like, okay, where are they? And they're like, figure it out. I'm like, all right. And then he goes, and then we'll be at our cars waiting for you to get there. And I'm like, well, where are you parked? They're like, figure it out. I'm like, oh, shoot. All right. So I'm walking around in the hallway in this huge building, is Building 500 on Malmstrom Air Force Base. And a couple of the new other airmen, Van Ness, he's a guy that I went through tech school with. I said, hey, you going to get vehicles? He's like, yeah. I was like, where is it? He's like, oh, my boss says it's at VRC, and I got to do this. I said, they gave you some instructions? I was like, great, I'm going to copy you. The two senior airmen, they didn't tell me jack, so I'm totally lost. So we get over there. There's 2 trucks that I have to check out. And I was like, well, obviously it's just me. I can't drive 2 trucks at the same time. I check one truck out, and there's like a checklist, and it's like 3 pages long of stuff that you have to check out on a government vehicle. I mean, some people just get in, sign the 1800 and go. Not in security forces back then when we were driving these big F-350s. We were checking tire pressure, tire tread, oil level, transmission fluid, power steering, windshield wipers. Do the lights work? Does the sirens work? Everything. So it's a huge checklist. Finally get that done. As I'm driving around this big area around Building 500, I see some people, and they're parked behind their car, and they got folding lawn chairs out. They're smoking cigarettes and drinking coffee. I was like, okay, I have a feeling that this is them. So I pull up, and they're like, what took you so long? Get out and get our bags. And I'm like, oh, okay. So go in the truck and park, getting out, putting their bags in. They're like, where's your stuff? And I'm like, oh, well, I'm over at this dorm and blah, blah, blah. They're like, you didn't carry it? And I was like, well, it's a lot of gear to carry from the dorms. So I figure we just pick it up on the way out. They're like, oh, God, you're going to be a real pain, aren't you? And I was like, no, sir, I'll be good. And got out there, and it was just miserable. I was miserable. I did not know what I was getting myself into. And so I post out to the missile field. We worked a 5-and-5 schedule, which was I took for granted as a kid, as a 19-year-old security forces do. But I look back at that time, and I loved every minute of it. Having worked 5 on, 5 off. But we spent the night out there in the missile field, and at these places called missile alert facilities. And there it was you and your security forces, brothers and sisters, and then you had a chef, which was a services. Calling them a chef's a bit over the top. They could cook. Debatable if they could even cook, really. And then you had a facility manager. And we all had bedrooms, and we all just slept in the bedrooms out there, and showers, all that good stuff. So we get out there. They had satellite TV, so you could watch anything you wanted. You work these 12-hour shifts. The hours were like 6 to 6. So it was either 6 in the morning to 6 at night, or 6 at night till 6 in the morning. And on day shifts, you would go out and check certain launch facilities and do like some alarm tests and things like that. Or you would go post security if they're doing maintenance on a missile or something like that. And at night, nobody works at night, so everybody loved to work nights. You would just sit at the MAF and wait for an alarm to kick off to go clear it. So if it's like springtime, very rare that you might get an alarm. In the wintertime, if the weather's nice and quiet, like no snow, then very rare that you would get an alarm. And nobody's working on the missile, so you wouldn't have to do a whole lot. You might do a couple of alarm function checks and this and that over the night, like 1 or 2. The rest of your shift, you're either playing Xbox or PlayStation or watching TV, unless you were in upgrade training on the crew that I was on. I remember get there, do changeover. Changeover's done. The off-going crew left. Everybody's getting settled. When you go out there on your posting day, there's really nothing much for you to do, especially if nothing's going on. And people are starting to sit down and watch TV. So I'm like, oh, okay, cool. I got my stuff there. I'm going to sit down and watch TV. And they're like, hey, what are you doing? I said, I don't know. What do you need me to do? They're like, where's your verbal packet? And it was like a half of a CDC.
What's a CDC?
Oh, it's a career development course. And all the enlisted career fields, they would have to do the career development course and go through. Each career field has a certain number of volumes. And once you complete all the volumes, you do an end of course test. And then, but before that, you have to get certified in your position. You got to get quality controlled, QC'd on your duty position. And I was training to be a response force leader. So I was like, oh, it's my verbal package right here. And he goes, well, do you know it front to back? And I was like, no. And he goes, then that's where you're going to sit. And he points in this closet. It's like no windows, no nothing. And he goes, you will be in there unless we call you out to do an exercise. And I said, oh, okay. Old teenage CJ starting to get a little angry. And I'm like, let me hold my composure. So I go in this closet, I start studying the verbal packet, and I get it, right? I'm doing this every day. Obviously, I didn't get the whole verbal packet that tour. And then during the days, they would be like, hey, exercise, 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 and they would kick off something. It'd be individual spotted on the missile alert facility, go get them. They'd have somebody playing Op 4, and I'd have to go handcuff them, then do the search, and then do all that. And then they would ask me, like, job knowledge questions. And then they would do this, and I would just be like, oh, my God, this is miserable. Like, how long is this going to happen to me? So fast forward about 6 weeks. By then, I knew that packet front to back. I knew it like verbatim, like every word in there, every punctuation. I would give it to him, and he'd like, give me page 5, 4 nuke surety standards, go. And I would say, nuke surety standard 1 is to prevent the pre-arming, arming, launching, firing, or releasing of any inadvertent or nuclear missile, to prevent safety hazard, whatever.
You still know it.
I still know some of it. Like, it's drilled in here. Like, it can never go away. And they'd ask you, what's a dull sword? What's a covered wagon? What's a, helping hand? So then I'd go through all that, and I would know it verbatim. Boom, 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 boom. And then by this time now, I got to go up for quality control. So I kill it. I'm the first airman done with my training on my flight. Then we, out of the 4 of us that got there at the same time, I'm the first one done, and I scored 100 across the board. I did 100 on the verbal, 100 on the test, and 100 on the practical, which is once you do the first 2 portions, the practical happens at a random launch facility. Standard evaluation will come out, and they'll pull an exercise, and you don't know it's an exercise till you get there. So you'll get there, you'll get the alarm, we'll drive out to the launch facility, you'd go through all the procedures like you would do, running all your checklist procedures, and you will find something like a fake bomb, or somebody might be on there. Most of the time it was like a fake bomb hidden in a real inconspicuous, you'd have to really look for it. And then when you find it, you're like, over the radio, hey, I found something that looks like a bomb. And then that's when they say, okay, this is an exercise, go. And then now you know it's exercise, so now all your radio transmissions and you're being evaluated. And usually they're out there in the woods or somewhere watching you with binoculars to make sure you're going through all the procedures. And once you find it, then they come up and now they're over your shoulder while you're calling everything on the radio. I crushed that. Morgan Van Ness went right after me. He ended up crushing his. He highly qualified. I'm not sure if he got hundreds or not, but I know he highly qualified. But that was the standard that our flight mates put on us. And I look back at those times, and I love that guy, Carol, now. I haven't spoke to Millet. I don't even know where he went. But Carol and I ended up getting stationed at another duty station together, and I really appreciate that. At the time, I hated him, but it really brought the best out of what I was trying to do, because I was like, I'm going to learn this verbal packet, and I'm going to watch that freaking TV. Like, football's going to start soon. Like, I got to get this stuff ready. And then that was kind of how I trained my guys, too. I wasn't as mean or anything like that, because
come on.
I took what I appreciated from that experience and cut out the stuff that I knew made me a little mad. Like, I wouldn't make them go to vehicle to get 2 trucks by themselves, and I would tell them where it was at and things like that. But any new airman that did come to our crew, once I became a flight security controller, a desk sergeant, I would be the same way. I'd be like, do you know your verbal packet? Well, that's your room until you know that. And then when you know that, then you can watch TV. So I did that. I loved it. I started school at Malmstrom after my first enlistment. So my first enlistment, my first 4 years, just kind of blew by. Once I got certified on that first duty position, I kind of had earned my way. So all the hazing stops, everything's great. I get treated like a real person. And I got to watch TV, and we all had fun. And that first flight, I really made friends, like, to this day. There's a senior master sergeant named Jesse Adams. He's at Marine Corps PME right now, and that guy is just top notch, like, on another level of leadership. Like, I love watching him on Facebook, leading his guys. I love talking to him and bouncing leadership stuff off him. So,
how long did you stay in security forces? What was your career progression? What rank you get up to?
I made it all the way up to tech sergeant. You know, I was security forces for 13 years. Just being at Malmstrom, I was there for 5 years. I got put what's called the NCO retraining program. It was a NCOR. And basically, when you're at a missile base, it's hard to get out. So once you're there for so long, the Air Force is like, hey, we got too many staff sergeants. We're going to pull them all from the missile bases. And I made staff sergeant in 3.5 years and sewed on at my 4-year mark. And then went combat arms. And then from there, I went to Creech Air Force Base in Nevada doing desert warfare training, ground combat skills training, and I did that for quite some time. I went to Silver Flag for police, and it used to be for chaplains too. When I first got there, we would train chaplain assistants on firearm stuff so they could help protect the chaplain downrange and things like that. And it was always nice to have chaplains around during the training. They were always a lot of fun and a good time. They keep morale pretty high.
Yeah, so combat arms, that's just a special duty within security forces, or is that its own separate career field?
Yeah, so it used to be its own separate career field, and I think they've been fighting it since they merged with security forces. Like, when they merged, they were not happy about it. But it is a shred out. So when I popped up on the NCO retraining program, they were like, hey, you have to do one of the 2 shred outs. One was canine, the other one was combat arms. Kind of ties into when I was talking about going to school. I talked to, then she's my girlfriend now, my wife, Melissa. And I said, hey, you know, what's the best thing you think we should do? And she goes, well, if you want to finish school and finish your degree, combat arms is probably the best one, because we knew that K-9 had a high deployment turnaround. All my friends who went K-9 were pretty much 6 months out, 6 months back, 6 months out, 6 months back. And not every time they were attached to Air Forces. A lot of times they were with the Army and going outside the wire with the Army and doing all the IED stuff and searching and things like that. So I was like, all right, well, combat arms seems like a good fit for me, because at that point in my career, I was 2 years already started my bachelor's in professional aeronautics. Now it's changed to aeronautics at Embry-Riddle, because it was right around 2006 I saw my brother get his commission. So that was like my motivator of like getting into school.
Oh, cool. What did your brother commission into?
And he became a nav on J-Stars. Yeah, prior-enlisted guy. He was a crew chief, and then he went to communications after that, and then got his degree and became a nav on J-Stars.
Cool. Is he still in? Is he still serving?
No, he retired 4 years ago, and did 22 years of service, retired major, and now he's like a financial advisor for Edward Jones. He's loving life, though. I mean, he did great. I mean, my brother is like one of the biggest influences in my career, in my life, as far as a mentor goes. That guy, I mean, he came to visit me last October, and he showed up at my work, and I'm doing something with my students, and I come back, and he has like these 2 sheets of paper, and he's posted it up, and he's like, these are my 10 tenets of leadership that I live my career by, and this is how I kind of shape myself and want to train and shape my airmen. So now I have it all typed up. Like, he had it all hand jammed, like he just wanted. But that's my brother. Like, he's never off. He's always on, thinking like, what can I do to help my brother? What can I do to help anyone, like leadership wise? He's one of the best leaders I know. So I pinned on his second lieutenant bars, and I was like, man, you know, I could do this. If my brother can do this, I can do this, and I can do it better. And my brother's, he'll be the first one to tell you, he's like, yeah, you can. And you can do it better. You know, he's my biggest supporter. So I started school at Embry-Riddle, professional aeronautics, did 2 years, then went combat arms, moved down to Las Vegas, and then ended up finishing my degree in 2010. So that was 2006 I started, graduated in 2010, and tried to get my first package in. I wanted to be a pilot. It didn't work out. AFROTC was a dude. Yeah, so like I hated it just like all of our cadets hate it sometimes.
But you passed it, right?
I did pass it, but I didn't score high enough on the pilot component to get selected. But I submitted it anyway because I had read in the bot guide that even though you don't score a certain point, if you are a recipient of these awards, and it listed the Levito, and I was a Levito recipient winner, which is the number one person in graduating in the class of Airman Leadership School. I was like, oh, I'll just try and get it waived. And they were like, yeah, no waivers. See you later. So like my package didn't even stand a chance. And I was like, all right. So that was like my first blow of like, maybe this commissioning thing, I don't even know if it's going to happen. And then my brother was like, nah, man, dude, enlisted guys, a lot of us get turned down our first time. You got to keep plugging away. You can't give up. You got to keep going back. I said, all right. So fast forward again, a year, I retook the AFOQT, ended up crushing it the second time. The first time I really thought, just from my college education and where I was at, like, I don't really have to study much for this. I'll take it. I mean, the ASVAB was easy. If it's anything like the ASVAB, I'll crush it.
So says the Security Forces Airman.
Exactly. Yeah, right. Exactly. So I did it, and I didn't do too good. And then I retook, and I prepared this time, and I increased my scores and resubmitted again in 2011. Well, what I did not know at that time, too, is that when I re-enlisted, Combat Arms had a bonus. So it was only a 1 multiplier, and I had the option to turn it down. And at the time, when you're putting in an officer training school package, you have to work through what's called an education counselor, and they kind of help you box that package up correctly, and they mail it out for you. So I talked to him, and he basically was like, take the bonus, because if you don't get selected, then that's money you missed out on. And at the time, it made sense. I didn't think anything of it. Well, I submitted my package again, and then they kicked it back. They said, hey, sorry, you got a bonus. You have to serve half that enlistment. It's in this paragraph of this regulation. And I looked it up. I was like, oh, my God. And I said, well, I still got the bonus. Can I give it back? Is there like an exception to policy letter? What can I do? They were like, nope, just come back in 2012. I was like, oh, God, all right.
Now, do you know if this is still the policy? Does that still stand?
I believe it does still stand. When you sign a signing bonus in any career field, that basically makes your service commitment. You have to serve at least half of that.
All right. So word to the wise to any enlisted airman that's listening to this right now that they should actually read the contract.
Yeah, the process for officer training school has changed and shifted more onus on the member who is applying to officer training school, where they basically are like, here's the bot guide, and this is all the guidance that you need to submit a package. And all that information should be in the bot guide, and if it's not, it will reference what AFI that you can find out a question for. So really, really don't just look at what you need to do to build your package in the bot guide. Look at what type of stipulations might pertain to your situation in the bot guide if you have any of those questions.
Yeah, read the fine print, because you don't want to find yourself in a situation that maybe is not ideal for you. I mean, pretty awesome that you got to keep the bonus, right? But, you know, it also delayed your career goals for another year or so.
Absolutely. If they would have gave me that opportunity, I would have gave it back in a heartbeat. I would have rather have gotten my commission earlier, because I really, really wanted to be an RPA pilot. Because I working at Creech, I used to see them all the time, and I was like, man, this is the future. I really want to be part of that. I think it's historic. It didn't work out, but all things happen for a reason. I'm a very firm believer in things happen and decisions are made, and your path is your path, and you make the decisions to go down those paths, and what happens for a reason, to mold you to be a better human being, to be a better person, right? Your choices are the outcomes of how that plays out, and you may not know it or might not even realize the impact of those choices until it's all already done. So I ended up getting deployed in 2012 when I was able to redo a package. I went to Bagram Airfield, Afghanistan, as a combat arms guy, and I was certified in every weapon system that we use as far as like ground weaponry, and since I was security forces, so I could be posted almost anywhere. My main job, though, was working on weapon systems and making sure everybody's weapons were operational prior to any mission or going outside the wire or going to post. Or if anybody had any issues, they would come to me and I would fix it. And then if they needed a body, I could post, or I could be an extra body for a convoy or whatever. I was like a flex receiver. They could just put me anywhere. And that deployment pretty much re-blued me too. By this point, I felt like the Air Force was just really not my bag. Like, I had been in 11 years since 2001, and I felt like nothing ever really went my way. And I felt like I was doing everything the Air Force asked of me, and the Air Force wasn't like reciprocating what I'm asking of them. Like, I came in early. I crushed it at my first duty station. We talked about my evaluation. I did that, did good on my CDCs, made staff sergeant, did everything that was asked of me, started school, earned my CCAF, which is a Community College of the Air Force degree in criminal justice. And it's one of those little box checkers that, especially on the enlisted side, that it's really important if you want to get a good enlisted performance report. You know, I was doing all these things. I kept going to get higher education to broaden my knowledge. And I felt like I was doing everything the Air Force asked of me, and nothing was panning out for me. You know, non-selectee on my first board because of my AFOQT scores. Then second board non-selectee because I had just re-enlisted and took the bonus. Again, this goes back to choices. These are all things that I did, and the onus is on me. But at the time, I was blaming the Air Force when it was really my responsibility to make sure a lot of that stuff was done. And then right before the deployment, I was like, this is it for me. Like, I think if I finish this enlistment, I might get out. And I was already past 10. You know, this was 11 years, and I was like, I don't know if I can do this any longer. The Air Force just isn't paying me back. Me. I was super selfish. It was just one of those things. And then I got deployed. And I saw our airmen, our brothers and sisters across every branch doing the job in one of the worst places ever. And I was like, this is why we do this. This is why we do what we do. I was like really just blown away with the professionalism and everything that was going on over there, and how important security forces was. And I fell back in love with the Air Force and what I was doing. And I came back totally just switched on now. And once I made that switch, I was like, what can I do for the Air Force? What can I do for the airmen that I supervise? Because when you go down range, that shit ain't no joke. So came back totally switched. My commander was like, yeah, I like it. You're going to be the new NCOIC of Combat Arms. So then I took over that shop. It was the biggest combat arms office in Air Combat Command. I had like 20 staff sergeants under me and a couple techs, and had a great team. Probably best job I ever had.
You're a tech at the time?
I was a tech at the time. And I earned an MSM on that deployment, which is unheard of if you're not a senior NCO. I had a great colonel who's actually the deck commander at Ohio State now, Colonel Colin. And I ran an active shooter program for him. And I also responded to some things that were going on when we had some riots. And, you know, I did the best I could while I was there. And Colonel Colin really, he saw that in me. And my LT submitted me for a comm. And I kind of was like, oh, an AFCOM, cool. I was like, you know what? I'm not an awards type person. So I was like, cool, whatever. I'll take whatever you give me. Really, I was at that point in the deployment where I was just really appreciative. One, to still be alive and in one piece. Two, to be on my way back to the States to see my wife and continue my life. So I was like, just give me whatever and get me the heck out of here. That medal went across Colonel Colin's desk, and he was like, oh, this is Sergeant Carlisle who works this and that. And they were like, yes, sir. He's like, no, I want him put in for an MSM. So he kicked it back and said, put him in for an MSM, and I ended up getting an MSM out of that deployment, which I think was the turning point in my career for getting selected for OTS. Came back, totally, like I said, reblued, resubmitted my package, non-selected again, but my medal hadn't been approved yet. So I came back from the deployment, and my package didn't have my deployment medal on it. So I felt like maybe it was because my package met the board. My deployment bullets were on there that said I did a bunch. But, when you're looking at it, you're like, this guy says he did all this on this deployment, but where's his medal?
Yeah, where's the deck that proves it?
Exactly. So kicked it back, non-selectee. I was crushed because now you're talking about this is 3 attempts I made. And I said, you know what? This isn't meant to be because, like I said, I'm a firm believer of everything happens for a reason. So I said, this isn't meant to be. That's okay. That's okay. I'm going to crush this security forces gig, and I'm going to make chief. And my focus went to chief. I was like, I talked to my commander. I said, hey, when's the next NCO Academy? I'm going to go crush it, and then I'm going to come back. I said, I want to go to a high deploying unit, Ravens, or something like that, or 820th, which is 820th Security Forces, which is all they do is train stateside for rapid deployments. I was like, that's where I want to be. I want to be in leadership positions, leading airmen, and doing what I'm supposed to be doing, and I want to get better at being a Security Forces NCO. So my commander's like, awesome, let's do it. I said, cool. So I'm about to leave for NCOA. He's like, hey, where's your OTS package? I said, I'm not going to drop it, whatever. This was like early September. He's like, what do you mean? The board meets in a month. He's like, don't you have one already ready, right? You just got non-selected. It should be the same one. At that time, my medal had came in. I got an MSM, and now I'm an E6 with an MSM, which is pretty big. And I said, nah, sir, it's all good. I don't think the Air Force wants me as an officer, blah, blah, blah. He goes, oh, they do. And then obviously, first person I call is like, hey, bro, what do you think? He's like, do it. Just put it in. So I submit the package as I'm leaving for NCOA. And get about 3 weeks into NCOA. It's October 2013. Air Force sequestration. Government shutdown. Boom. I got recalled from that freaking TDY 3 weeks in. They're like, hey, by the way, we're shutting down all funding for your TDY. You got 18 hours to get back here. And, you're not going to get paid for a while. So good luck. Yeah, so I'm like, God dang it. And then, and by the way, the OTS board got canceled. Sweet. So I'm driving back like, this is great. This ain't meant to be. I'm like, whatever. It's just one of those things. It's life, right? It's life. It's just another opportunity. It's another adversity thing I need to rise up to and just take it on the chin and keep pushing forward because now I'm in. Now I'm all in. I'm completely bought in to the Air Force, our mission, what we do, everything. Get back, talk to my commander, let him know. He's like, that board will meet. Just wait for the funds to drop. I said, okay, cool. And at the time, I was trying to be Security Forces OSI or 13 Lima, which is the Air Liaison Officer. So I was like, I'll just try one of these. And I was going to take a pass test or whatever, but I didn't realize it at the time. But the way to get picked up for a liaison officer spot at 13 Lima, you have to be accepted in another AFSC first. So you have a backup, and then you would go try out. So I just submitted for those. And then OSI is highly competitive, which I had zero clue it was that competitive at the time. And so I put it on the list, and then I had Security Forces at the top because I was like, I'll just be a Security Forces officer. I'm loving what I do now at this point. I think I can have a huge impact on airmen, leading them and trying to get what my idea of a good culture is and leadership and what the best routes to take on leading airmen would be. So sure enough, January comes, another opportunity for me to go to NCOA again pops up. So I was like, I'll take it, because now they're talking about doing distance learning. And if you do distance learning, it's an asterisk. And I'm like, I'm going for chief. I don't want an asterisk by my name at all. I'm doing in residence. Let's go. And commander's right on board. He's like, you got it. So I rolled out the NCO Academy. I'm there again, 3 weeks in. I get a call from AFPC. They're like, hey, we still got your package. The board's meeting. Do you still want to meet the board? I said, absolutely. They said, okay, well, here's the thing. I need you to sign a memorandum that says you're only going to do space or missiles.
Ooh. And you're like, what?
Yeah. So they just split the career fields. So I thought it was just one career field. And I was like, here I go. I'm going to be a missileer at Malmstrom Air Force Base, because I already have a nuclear experience indicator. Like, oh, crap. And I said, all right, cool. They're like, you still want to be an officer? I said, if it means that I get to still lead airmen and still have a positive impact on what I'm doing, because can I do that as an NCO? Yes. Is my impact going to be as great as it would be as an officer? Debatable, right? Because there's great NCOs out there who have great impacts, and I could have done that. But I had higher aspirations. I did want to be an officer. So I was like, no problem, cool, I'll sign the memorandum. And in my head, I'm thinking I'll do whatever they want me to do, and then I'll meet those requirements. And when the opportunity comes up, because the Air Force is always opening doors, I was like, they're going to open a door, and they're going to need people for something. And if it's something that I like, I'll go. That's what I'll do. Ended up getting space operations. I got selected, obviously, right? I found out 2 weeks after I got back from NCOA, 2014, I ended up getting selected, shipped out for OTS in May. At this time, my daughter's turning 1 year old. Now I've been to multiple kind of TDYs, being away from her in and out. Then now I got to go to OTS, and then I got to go to space training, but it's all good. It all worked out for the better. Got to OTS, did that 10 weeks, officer training school, Maxwell Air Force Base, 10 weeks that I'll never get back in my life. I mean, especially back in 2014, they had the overlapping upper class thing. So my A and J, which is like an assistant flight commander and the junior flight commander, they were both like non-priors. So they literally been in for 6 weeks, and they're like tearing into me about stuff and just pettiness. And I was like, okay, this is the game. Roger that. I'll do whatever. Okay.
These non-priors never served in the military before, berating a 13-year tech sergeant from security forces, deployed, received an MSM.
Yeah.
They're going to set you straight.
Yeah, exactly. Right. Because in my head, I'm like, dude, like, you are the reason why I'm becoming an officer. That is what I was thinking. Because it's leaders like that get a little bit of power, and then they think that they're just going to crap on everybody because they can. That's not how that works. That's not how leadership works. Not even trying to understand. And then they get to know me, and then they start backing up a little bit. And I'm like, now I'm bringing them in. Dude, come here. Let's talk. Let me tell you something. You're going about this all wrong. Like,
yeah, I mean, not only had you had all this experience behind you, your 13 years as an enlisted airman, as an NCO, but you had literally just finished NCOA, where they talk about all this stuff.
Yeah, I'm like, there's so many different personalities. I'm learning, all the four lenses, the disc stuff. And I'm like, you can't just be this way. Like, and it shifted. Things got easier. Got through OTS. I was like, cool. That's just one of those things you got to go through. Again, just like basic training, just like field training. At the time, you hate it because nobody wants to be stressed out in a stressed environment, but you've got to do what you got to do and prove to not only yourself, but to everybody else who's looking at you to be a leader. I mean, that's what we do this for. Like, it's not just to get a job. It's, you need to prove to people why you need to be here. So I was okay with it. It was a pain, and 10 weeks I'll never get back. And, if I had to do it again, I'd do it again 100 times over to be where I'm. Then I got to space operations at Space 100, and I fell in love with the mission because now I'm doing operations, right? As security forces, I'm in the support element of what we do, right? We support operations, right, by providing security and doing all that. And now I'm in operations, and now I'm seeing like how I can be really directly involved with mission stuff, like direct operations. I'm like, man, this is awesome. I remember coming to Space 100 one morning, and we'd been going for about 2 weeks, and our instructor, his name's Bucky, is what everybody called him. He's like, hey, LT. He's like, man, every time you come in here, you got a smile on your face. It's like ear to ear. How are you so happy to be here? And I said, well, because the 13 years prior to me being here, I was security forces. This job is like way better. So there's nothing here that you can do to make me think any different. Like, I've done some hard stuff, and this right here, it's a challenge on my brain, but it was something I was willing to do, and I loved it. I fell in love with it. Got through Space 100, ended up getting orders to Schriever Air Force Base as a satellite vehicle operator on the Defense Satellite Communication System for military satellite communications. I did that for a little bit before I became a mission commander. And then once I became a mission commander, I was watching other lieutenants, supervising other lieutenants, and leading other airmen working those different satellite systems. And then the opportunity for Air Force ROTC came up, and just, you know, from my history and everything, being combat arms and being an instructor, being a pre-deployment instructor, teaching those things, I felt like this was a great opportunity for me to really make a huge impact that I'll never see, which is totally okay. But if I can put some officers into the Air Force with a great mentality and focus on what they really need to be thinking about, and them not thinking they're just second lieutenants and they're going to know it all because they have a college degree, then I'm doing my job, and this is going to pay huge dividends to them. And that was my motivation. And plus, my wife's family was from this area. So the hot jobs email came down. I called my wife. I'm like, babe, there's a job opportunity for me to teach at the University of Massachusetts Amherst for Air Force ROTC. It's 20 minutes from where your twin brother is. She goes, did you apply? And I said, not yet. I'm calling to ask you for permission. She's like, you need to put in your package like now. She's like, somebody else is going to get the job. I was like, oh, it's on a hot jobs list, baby, so nobody wants it. So I said, I'll get it. So I did the package, talked to my commanders, my DO. They're a little hesitant to give me the job because Air Force ROTC, as you know, they're kind of changing the view on it. They're trying to, right? They're trying to make ROTC like a positive, like a force multiplier type, where you go outside your career field, learn a little bit more about leadership, and then come back and you bring all these good things, kind of like how the enlisted do with different special duties with recruiting and stuff. So my DO, he brought me in, and he's like, you know, you're on a good track, Carlisle. You're doing good things in the space community. You know, we'd hate to lose you, and the ROTC could set you back on your goals. And I said, well, sir, you know, as a prior-enlisted guy, at that point I had 14 years, almost 15 years. I said, I'm okay with leaving the career field and taking that jump, because I don't think I'm going to be like a squadron commander or anything like that. That's not my aspirations or my goals right now. My goal is just to do the best I could do for the airmen that I'm over and do what's best for my family. He's like, all right, that works for me. And I said, honestly, sir, I was like, I'm young in my commission career. I think even if I left, I'll still be able to come back and do good things for the space community. And if those good things could lead to something, I think there's 1,000 different ways to get promoted. Obviously, a lot of leadership, good leaders will try and help you and make the best decisions. But ultimately, that decision on what your career path is ultimately up to you. There's 1,000 ways to be a squadron commander and 1,000 ways to get to 06. And I wasn't going to let doubt come in when it come to taking Air Force ROTC. And he knew that, and he was like, awesome. If that's what you want to do, Carlisle, I'm good. So he's like, show me where to sign. I routed my package. My squadron commander said the same thing. He's like, hey, I talked to the DO. He says he's got your back 100%. I had some great leadership. I mean, when I came to the space community, I don't think I've worked in a better unit. Just absolutely great culture, hardworking, leaders really looking out for their guys. I mean, it's exactly what I wanted as an officer. And it was bittersweet to leave it. But I knew I'd be coming back. I'm coming back now in July, and those 3 years in Air Force ROTC have flown by. So I got hired, did Air Force ROTC, and I've been loving it so far. It's a little bit more tasking if anybody's out there interested in doing Air Force ROTC. It is a great, great job, but also know that it is a lot more work than what you think it is going into it. Giving up some summers, administrative work on the wing side, and trying to get things accomplished with the systems that we use is a challenge within itself. But I don't regret it one bit. I actually love every freaking year I've been here. Every time I went to field training, before I go, I get a little like, ugh. But once I'm there and getting after it, all that goes away. Like, I'm here to help these guys be better leaders, and I'm going to give them 100%. I loved it. This past summer, being an FTO, I liked it better than being a DOI. I know me and you were DOI together that first year, and I love DOI too. I mean, you get to see the whole encampment, and you get to try and tell the entire encampment on what you see as a leader. And that is awesome. The FTO side, I really liked. Didn't get to see the whole encampment, but I really got to spend that quality time with those guys that I got to watch and train and watch their development. So rewarding on both sides. I enjoyed both times I went to field training, and I don't regret going at all. And if I had to go back a third time, which I don't want to go back a third time at all.
You mean you're not on the list?
No. Colonel Bon Jovi, he hooked me up, so don't have to go back. But if I did, I'd still embrace that same opportunity with the same mentality and just crush it and then do it. But, yeah, my report no later than date's in July, so I'm all good.
Colin, man, that was great. I sure appreciate that. When you were doing that recording and, you wrapped it all up, what were your kind of initial thoughts that you wanted to talk with the audience about?
The first thing that comes to mind is this is why I think it's so important for an officer to have the prior enlisted experience, because there is so much growth and development that happens there. Obviously, you can be a successful officer without being first enlisted, but it brings such an important perspective that I know I wish I had, and I think I would be a better officer if I had it. And but that's not the way that the Air Force is currently organized. And I know that we'll get into our thoughts on the way that officers should be trained and how they should all have the enlisted perspective. But that was the first thought that came to my mind from this part of CJ's interview, is just the incredible lessons that he learned as an enlisted airman.
Yeah, you and I have talked about that before in the past, how that enlisted experience is incredibly valuable. And I've also shared that opinion that I regret that I don't have that experience. I feel like I'm handicapped in some way, but CJ is a great storyteller. And the thing is, irrespective of what your Air Force experience is, you can draw parallels to what he experienced, as a brand new airman showing up at a new installation, having to go find, like you said, the flight line or, these other silly things that happen. And that's all part of it. And it's what makes being an airman. And I'm glad that he shared some of that with us. One of the things he mentioned in there that I wanted to bring up, not only because I'm slightly terrified of these people, but also because I love them. I hope any Marines out there don't think that we have any negative feelings toward our Marine brothers and sisters. I absolutely love them. I am grateful for them. I am just also certain that I am not supposed to be one of them. So we need them. They are fantastic. Some of the best officers I've ever met were Marine Corps officers, but I also feel that I have found my people in the Air Force.
Yeah, that's definitely why we have the different services, not only so that we can focus on different capabilities and ways of delivering the use of force on behalf of the United States, but because each of the different branches has its own culture.
Yeah, got a quick thought experiment for you that goes along exactly with that. So imagine the Avengers, right? We're kind of nerdy comic book people, Colin, you and I.
Right.
If you were to think of the Avengers characters and assign them to a military branch, who do you think the Air Force would be?
Iron Man. Tony Stark. Done.
Yeah, okay, right? Easy. Who do you think Marines are?
The Hulk.
Okay, see, we didn't even talk about this beforehand or ever in the past, and that's exactly what I think when I think of the Marines and I think of the Air Force, right? We've got our Gucci fancy equipment, we've got the nice cars and the money, and when I think of my Marines, I think of Hulk smash, right? And boy, we need them, and they're great at it. Just don't ever be on the opposite end of receiving from the Marines. That's not a good place to be. I'm glad they're on my team, Colin.
Absolutely. And I'm really glad that Iron Man defeated Thanos.
Just had to put that in there, didn't you?
Well, yeah, because the most effective Marine is an angry Marine, and that comment right there just 10x'd their effectiveness.
There you go. All right. Something else I wanted to talk about, that CJ brought up is his OTS application experience. And we've said this many times, and I think it bears repeating. OTS application and selection is hard. He had to apply a lot, and he wasn't picked up a lot. And that is not abnormal. It was recently announced that some of the boards for OTS were being severely limited. So the non-rated board, they eliminated a significant portion of the career fields that were eligible, and the career fields that they were selecting for, they had a very limited set of degrees that were allowed. And this is the kind of stuff that OTS is for. OTS is the flexible partner in the commissioning program. And if you've got this 10-year plan and that's what you're going to do, you just have to kind of be prepared for some heartbreak. And I wish it were different, but that's the way it is. I personally know a fantastic E7 Master Sergeant who's planning to apply for this next board. And after this announcement, they are no longer even eligible. And now it'll probably be another calendar year before they're even eligible for a board. And that's just kind of how it is. That's how it shook out for CJ a little bit, just with selection and non-selection and such. So I just think it bears repeating. It's going to be hard. It's going to be long. You need to kind of steel yourself emotionally for that kind of adversity.
Yeah. But then at the same time, he didn't give up.
Absolutely.
He applied and he applied and he applied. And in the intervening time, between those selection boards, he continued to grow and he continued to develop and he continued to crush it in his enlisted job, so that eventually when things broke his way, he was ready for it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, at least the way I saw, is in his attitude when he said, what can I do for the Air Force? And you'll probably hear more about that next week when he gets into his more perspective on leadership. But you can tell in his development as an airman that at first it was a little bit, this is what the Air Force owes me. And then he turned it around and saw that, no, it's what can I give the Air Force? And that's when things really started to take off for him and kind of the brakes started to go his way.
Yeah, absolutely. Something that I want to say about this interview, he was talking about his deployment. There was a commander, there was an 06 who really took care of him.
Yeah, he was talking about how he was submitted for a decoration.
Yeah, so he was submitted for a commendation medal, which is standard and totally honorable, totally good. There's nothing wrong with a commendation medal. But when that decoration package arrived at the desk of his 06, the colonel that was responsible for him at that time, he said, no, we're not doing a commendation. We're going to give him a meritorious service medal, an MSM, which is a big deal to give that to a tech sergeant.
It is a big deal. For those that may not be super familiar, there's kind of three primary medals that the bulk of the Air Force are going to get for achievement. So you have an Air Force Achievement Medal, you have an Air Force Commendation Medal, and then you have the Meritorious Service Medal. And those are kind of the big three, and they're most often associated with rank and position and experience, right? So as a young airman, whether officer or enlisted, you're probably going to get an achievement medal. As a captain to senior captain, you're probably going to get a COM, as they're called, an Air Force Commendation Medal. Same with, the middle enlisted ranks. And then as you get up into the field grade officer as well as the senior NCO, that's when you can expect generally to start receiving MSMs. And that's pretty much it. Once you start getting into the 06s and generals, they give themselves medals that no one else can get. And, it gets weird after that. But those are kind of the big three. And so to be in that middle enlisted tier and get an MSM, that's a big deal.
Yeah. So the fact that this commander took the time to adjust that decoration to upgrade it from a commendation into an MSM is a big deal. It required more coordination, more lines on the actual decoration itself. he had to justify it to his superiors in order to get it approved.
Absolutely. I mean, because that doesn't line up with the quote unquote normal award. Yeah, absolutely. I probably had to go pretty high even.
Yeah. So that commander, that colonel, was sticking his neck out for this tech sergeant to make sure that he got the recognition that he deserved. That is a big deal. And CJ said it was likely because he had that MSM in his package on his last go around for his application to OTS that he was able to get picked up. So because an officer made the effort on behalf of CJ, on behalf of this tech sergeant, he was finally able to become the officer that he is today.
Yeah. I mean, doesn't that just say something about the power a single person can have to influence the life of somebody else? And I hope that I can be a force for good like that, because people have done that for me. You know, not in that exact setting, but I have absolutely had officers stick their neck out for me and take risk. And I hope not only to be deserving of that risk and to pay back those risks, but also to pay it forward when it's my turn.
Yeah, and that is really what being an officer is about, is taking care of your people. Yes, we emphasize mission comes first. But when you are able, where able, you have to take care of your people. And it is this kind of example that shows what you can do for the Air Force. Yeah, CJ probably would have made Master Sergeant, maybe even senior or chief. You know, those were his goals. But because this commander made the effort to give him the MSM, he was able to go to OTS and receive his commission and be an instructor in Air Force ROTC. And so now there is a generation of future officers that have had CJ as their mentor. And that is going to be a huge blessing and gift to the Air Force for years to come.
It's good stuff, man. Awesome. Well, thanks, Colin, for arranging that. That was great. Hopefully someday you can introduce me. Even better if it's at a barbecue at your place. You know, I'd really love to sit down and have a chat with CJ.
Yeah, I agree with you. CJ is definitely one of the best people I've come across in my Air Force experience. So glad that we were able to share this interview with you, and definitely looking forward to next week and getting the rest of his experience being an instructor in Air Force ROTC and an officer in space operations.
Well, that about wraps it up for this week. Thank you again for listening to this week's episode of Commission Ed.
Thank you for listening to Commission Ed, the Air Force Officer Podcast. The views and opinions of the authors expressed herein do not state or reflect those of the U.S. government and shall not be used for advertising or product endorsement purposes. Mention of any specific commercial products, process, or service by trade name, trademark, manufacturer, or otherwise does not necessarily constitute nor imply its endorsement, recommendation, or favoring by the U.S. government. The mention of companies by name is solely for the purpose of discussion and should not be implied as endorsement.